Hello, beautiful ladies. This is Ola Davis with episode number 79 of the When Marriage Hurts podcast. And on this episode, ladies, I'm just going to tell you what I want to talk about. I'm even having trouble verbalizing or articulating what exactly I want to talk about on this episode. I'm recording this on Sunday. And today has just been a really weird day for me. I woke up and just about an hour or so after I woke up, I was already pissed and angry because I got some bad news. Not personal bad news, but just bad news. So I figured since I was recording this episode today, I might as well talk about it on the podcast. So the news that I got this morning was that the pastor of Gateway Church in Texas, United States, has admitted to what he calls a moral failure. So yes, we're going to be talking about abuse in church today. For those of you from the United States or that live in the United States, you probably know this pastor, or you've seen him on Christian TV or the internet. His name is Robert Morris. He's the senior pastor of Gateway Church. He's currently in his 60s, but he admitted to having inappropriate relationship with what he calls a young lady, but it happened to be a 12-year-old. Okay, so he was in his 20s, married with a child, and he did inappropriate stuff. I probably should give a warning before I go any further. If you are listening to today's episode with a child around, I doubt anyone really listens to this podcast within earshot of children, but I'm just going to give a warning that you probably do not want to listen to this around a child. So, this pastor says he had a moral failure with a young lady. But what really happened was that he practically sexually assaulted this little girl at the time. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was something that happened started when she was 12 and continued till she was in her teen years. And the only consequence of that action, or that, I should say, that behavior, was that this pastor got stepped away from ministry for 2 years. Now, why am I talking about this on a podcast that usually talks about difficult marriages and hidden abuse? It's because as women in difficult marriages, we need to have a bird's eye view of what's going on in our marriage. And for us to do that, for us to be able to objectively analyze what's going on in our marriages, we can't just isolate it to, oh, my husband's bad, or my husband's terrible, or living, we can't just isolate it that way. We have to look at the bigger picture and kind of analyze and understand the beliefs that we've held that got us to this point. We have to be able to look at and analyze the societal beliefs and the religious beliefs and the culture we live in and the religious culture that we belong to, and how those have affected the way we respond to our maltreatment in marriage. Okay. When you think of the fact that this guy did what he did, and the church leaders at the time, which you and I know were most probably just men, right, thought that the most appropriate action, this guy molests a child, and they think the most appropriate action was to just have him step away from ministry for 2 years for what they call a process of restoration. That kind of nonsense only happens in the church, okay? Out there in the world, when someone molests your child, you notify the police. But because the church is so dysfunctional, and in a dysfunctional family, dysfunctional families don't, quote unquote, wash their linen in public. They handle things in-house because it's more important to project an image of perfection and beauty to the outside world than it is to acknowledge whatever's rotten on the inside. So they covered the stuff up, and then they said, oh, he begged for the forgiveness of the girl's parents, and they forgave him, and yada, yada, yada. And, I just had to think, they're talking about, oh, he apologized to the girl's parents, and he was forgiven by the girl's father. And I'm like, okay, I can understand the parents being hurt. But the girl, the victim that was actually assaulted, she's the one that's going to carry this trauma for the rest of her life. And this guy goes on to have a successful ministry. And I'm like, how, as Christians, how do we get to a point where we think this is okay? How do we get to a point where we basically excuse badly behaving people, and we say things like, well, no one's perfect, judge not lest you be judged, and all this kind of twisting of scriptures that they do in church to protect perpetrators of abuse, perpetrators of evil, while the victim suffers. How did we become that as a church? Why is it that people that aren't religious, people that do not belong to the church, people in the world that the church is always telling us to be wary of, the people of the world that the church is always telling us that we're not supposed to be like them because they are lost in the darkness or whatever, why is it that they have enough wisdom, the so-called, the quote-unquote world, have enough wisdom to know that when a person molests a child, they should not be allowed to hold a position where they have access to vulnerable people? Because a person that molests a child in the world will not be allowed to work in a school. They will not be allowed to work in a daycare. They will not be allowed to work anywhere where they're going to have access to children. They wouldn't even be allowed to be a doctor or a lawyer. because the world understands that this person would pose a danger to vulnerable people. But the church doesn't get that. They don't. And that's why this man was quote unquote restored to ministry. They said he was biblically restored, whatever that means. And that just baffles me. So when you kind of understand that this is how churches tend to operate, and you now think in terms of your own situation when you begin to have, terrible difficulties in your marriage, when your husband begins to mistreat you, and you try to get the church involved, and you don't get the kind of response that you imagine you would, you have to understand that in a lot of cases, churches are more committed to protecting an abusive person than they are to protecting victims. Am I saying 100% of churches are like this? No, but I'll tell you, the ones that are not are actually like unicorns. They are very rare. They are very rare. When the church is committed to protecting its quote-unquote spotless image, than they are committed to protecting people without a voice, victims of abuse, people who have no one to protect them, people who have been victimized, then that kind of church is not the place that you want to go to get help, because they are probably going to hurt you more than your husband already did. And that's it on today's podcast episode, ladies. For any of you that have gone to the church to seek help with your marriage, if you are in a place where you're just confused and you're thinking, oh, maybe I didn't explain it well to them, maybe they're just not understanding it, maybe I just wasn't able to really articulate what was going on. Honey, it's not about that. It's the fact that they really don't care, and they will throw you under the bus as long as their perfect image stays intact. So that's all I have for you this week. And it's also Father's Day weekend. I mean, by the time you'll be listening to this, it would be a day or so after Father's Day. And I hope it wasn't a stressful one for you. I know that it can, if you're married to someone that is dramatic and, likes to have all of the attention and likes to just make you feel like you're inadequate, holidays like Father's Day can be a very stressful one for women in that kind of relationship or marriage. But I hope it wasn't too stressful for you. I hope you're doing your best to take care of yourself, and I want you to know that through all of this, God never leaves you nor forsake you. And for the record, God is God and church leaders are church leaders. we need to understand that church leaders don't, a lot of times they do not speak for God and they do not represent God. Know that and know peace. I hope you have a wonderful week. Until the next time that I see you on the podcast, stay blessed.